my name is Jesper Karlsson, and I'm the one who booked the trip to Aarhus yesterday. So we will see how I will get back, because I have the same trip booked for today. But my presentation will be about youth sport for sale, commercialization in Swedish youth sport. And it will be a summary of my dissertation thesis, which in English is called Child and Youth Sport for Sale, Desire, Immaterial Labor and Commodification, which I defended in November last year at the Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences. Today I work as a substitute lecturer at the Department of Child and Youth Studies at Stockholm University. But what I will talk about is the Swedish context of sport for children and youth. Then I will go into a bit of societal context, immaterial labor and desire. I will present the purpose and research questions of the thesis. And then I will present a summary of the 4 sub-studies that are included in the thesis. And I will end with discussion and some conclusions. So, to start off, organized sport in Sweden has long been dominated by the Swedish Sport Confederation, Riksidrottsförbundet, or RF, a non-profit democratic umbrella organization for sports club. And RF, they works towards maintaining ideals related to sports for all and receives governmental fundings for this purpose. In this sense, it shares a lot of traits with the rest of the Scandinavian sports confederations. But however, as Karin said, in recent years, sport businesses offering services to children and youth have started to emerge in Sweden. And this has started to raise concerns about the impact of this kind of commercialization and how it affects child and youth sport. But despite these concerns, there is limited empirical research on the topic. So in the dissertation, I situate this development of companies in relation to a post-industrial society in order to understand the phenomenon. So in a post-industrial society, it is argued that individuals, for instance, are governed to act as entrepreneurs in all of their lives, where they are governed to invest in themselves and take responsibility for the decisions that they take. And this also includes parenthood, where parents are also expected to invest in their children, this in order to ensure their success. But also in a post-industrial society, small business owners, or how we commonly understand the words entrepreneurs, have become to be seen as heroes in this kind of economy. They are seen as the ones who can solve tomorrow's unemployment. And in the early 1990s, they were hailed as the spearhead of the economy, and entrepreneurship now permeates all school education almost. So I argue that this societal context has created a favorable environment for companies that sell children and youth sports. But also in a post-industrial era, communication plays a key role in selling services and products by imbuing them with social and cultural values. There's a scene in this Nike commercial, for instance, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. They try to fill their product with cultural values that appeal to customers' emotions, tastes, and desires. And this is something defined as immaterial labor. And it is something that surrounds us everywhere almost, and constantly. And this labor of influencing people's understanding and desires is what drives changes in the direction that companies profit from. So in the dissertation, I define this change process as deterritorialization, territorialization, and reterritorialization processes. But I won't go into any deeper at this point of what those terms mean. But I think it will become a bit more clear as we go along. So based on this background, the purpose and research questions in the dissertations are to investigate how commercially driven children's and youth sport in Sweden function in terms of the services offered by companies, how these services are filled with social and cultural values, and how they are positioned in relation to volunteer-driven children's and youth sport. The study is guided by the following research questions. In what ways do companies deterritorialize children's and youth sport in Sweden? And how is commercially driven children and youth sports reterritorialized? In what ways do companies produce immaterial values through immaterial labor, both about themselves and about children's and youth sport in general? How do companies produce symbolic persons or imaginary persons, as Fiona was talking about, through visual representations? And how do leading figures in commercially driven children's and youth sport position Swedish child and youth sport? And in order to answer this, I used a qualitative method where I collected and analyzed my empirical data primarily from websites of the companies. But I also did interviews with some of the leading entrepreneurs of these businesses. So the empirical data consists of 50 companies' websites in Article 1, in Article 2, verbal text from the 8 companies' websites, in Article 3, images from 33 companies' websites, 697 images. And these images were from the businesses that had boys and girl services. They were orientated towards both boys and girls. And then in Article 4, it was interviews with representatives from 6 companies. So to move on to the articles of the dissertation, the first one is about how companies deterritorialize youth sport in Sweden. It is published in Sport in Society, and all subtitles are co-written by my supervisors, Karin Redelius, Åsa Bäckström, and Magnus Kilger. But Magnus is not co-writing in this one, so it's just me, Karin, and Åsa. And the purpose of this article is to map different commercial companies and the services they offer through their websites. In doing so, the article contributes to knowledge about how youth sport have been deterritorialized to be territorialized on the market for youth sports. So we identify 4 commercial child and youth sport processes. We refer to them as the physical activity process, which is the first one. It consists of companies targeting children between 3 to 7 years old. Generally, some also have their services available for younger children than 3 years old. They mainly offer services such as children's gymnastics and such services. Some companies also sell babysitting services and organize birthday parties, etc. So it's not the only sports services they offer. The next one is the fusion process, which consists of companies that target children between 10 to 15 years old. The companies primarily sell mixed sports camps, where a variety of sports is assembled at a sports camp during the summer. The camps are mainly arranged during the summer. They are usually overnight camps, but some offer what they call day camps as well, which is for younger children than 10 years old. And the third is, has this stopped? No? The third is the sports development process, which consists of companies that target children from 8 years old and all up to adults. These companies specialize in a specific sport and offer everything from individual training camps to training camps for sports club. They also sell their services as coaching education and such services. Almost everything that you can imagine they sell it, from individual training sessions to a training camp for a sports club or a whole sports team or a whole sports club. But some even have collaborations with schools. So it stretches and it's a bit multifaceted, these processes. And the fourth process, the invitation process, It consists of companies that target children from 10 years old to adult players. And these companies are similar to those in the development process, but what sets them apart is that these businesses also have services where they scout and invite certain players to their training camps or their special training sessions. Some even have an academy where they invite and scout players for. And most of these companies, they offer their services to both girls and boys. However, many of the ice hockey companies which we found in the sports development process only target boys. The services also have different costs, and the training packages they sell, they vary. For example, in the physical activity process, it is common that this business sell semester trainings, which is it's consisting of 5 to 10 training sessions for around 2,000 Swedish crowns. Meanwhile, the most expensive service is found in the invitation process. This is a company who offers a service for adolescents to become part of their academy. And if they are accepted into this academy, they have the opportunity to live on this academy and do their middle and high school education at a distance. And the cost for such an arrangement is 300,000 Swedish crowns per semester, so it's not that cheap. And the services in the other processes, they do not cost as much, but still around 5,000 crowns, Swedish crowns for a week sports camp. So in the second sub-study, we analyze how companies present themselves and their services as part of their immaterial labor, and how this can be seen as forces shaping youth sports. And it is published in Sports Education and Society. And what becomes visible in the analysis is that they primarily emphasize offering training with educated coaches, where the individual is in focus, and that the services bring happiness to children. But, and this is evident regardless of what kind of process they represent, but how they articulate these values differ. So for instance, within the physical activity process, the surveyed companies highlight that their trainers or coaches have experience from preschool activities and are educated in preschool as preschool teachers. While within the sports development and invitation process, they instead emphasize that the leaders are former professionals. And the fusion process, they are somewhere between these two poles. They highlight that their coaches are both socially competent, but also good in sports development. And the companies also describe how they have the child's individual development in focus. However, this is also articulated differently. So in the physical activity process, the importance of individual trainings is emphasized to articulate that everyone can participate. And the same tendencies can be seen on the fusion process as well. But when the companies in the sport development and the invitation processes highlight individual development, they rather use it as a way to ensure maximum sports development for the individuals. And these differences also appear when they emphasize that the services bring happiness to children. So in the physical activity and fusion process, happiness becomes something that the child will get from be part of the services for coming there. While in the sports development process and the invitation process, happiness is rather directed towards the future, something that one will become if one succeeds in sport. So all these articulations differ, and based on this analysis, it can be seen that regardless of the focus the companies fill youth sports, they fill it with similar social and cultural values. So in other words, they try to materialize different desires of children and young people as well as their parents, in order to get them to consume the different services. And the third study, it's quite similar to the previous one, but this time it deals with the images on the company's websites. And the aim is to investigate and analyze visual representations of children found on the websites, and it is published in International Journal of Sport Communication. And the first thing that can be said is that when companies represent children and young people, they produce symbolic persons or imaginary persons that are in line with a white child. Girls and boys are relatively evenly distributed, and moreover, children are often represented as physically competent. And in addition to this, it's almost pervasive that a slim child without any physical disabilities emerges in the pictures. Another thing that can be seen in the analysis is that the child or children are often portrayed as independent. They're often captured in the midst of an activity, and they are rarely accompanied by any adults. They rarely look back into the camera, and in other words, the pictures decentralize an adult gaze in favor of a children's. It's emphasized as a way to appeal to adults' notions that if something appears to come from the children themselves, it is considered something positive and good among adults. However, there is a certain difference in how children are represented based on age. Younger children, they pose more often into the camera and let their childlikeness shine through. In this picture, there is more of an adult nostalgic view of children and childhood that permeates the pictures. So overall, the representations align with the discourses of innocent and or competent child and in line with the middle-class notions of childhood. So one point is that when children and youth sports are commercialized, it also becomes normative. It becomes to appeal to normative notions of children and sports. And in the fourth sub-study, we'll leave the company's website and instead interview leading figures from companies that sell these services to children and youth. It is published in Sports Studies Forum, and the purpose is to analyze how entrepreneurs in the form of leading figures from companies that sell children and youth sports services position themselves as well as children and youth sport in Sweden. And the first thing to note is that they all position themselves as coming from the sport club sectors. They have all been or are leaders or board members in sports clubs. And due to this, they also have insights and experience which they use to position themselves towards sports clubs. And they take a position, for instance, that sport clubs have hidden interests that involve that some wanting to make coaching careers or that money from children and youth sport is used for the older teams. So in this way, in the entrepreneurs' narratives, commercial children and youth sport emerges a more neutral alternative that lacks these hidden interests. And they also position sports club as inadequate in various ways. Some argue that it's too specialized and cannot offer a broad, high-quality children's sport, while others argue that there is too little specialization and that more and more people, young children and adults, have begun to understand this and therefore turn to commercial alternatives. But in addition to adopting this position, they also describe their businesses as part of a changing society, a more commercially oriented society. The position they take is that children and youth sport have a value in exchange. Simply put, they talk about it as a product like any other product on the market. And as a part of this, their customers are primarily middle-class families, and it's mainly those areas that they target. So to move on to the discussion, what emerges in the various sub-studies, and which leaves an important contribution for future research, is that commercial child and youth sports are multifaceted, and they function in different ways. It is not possible to talk about the commercialization of child and youth sport in the singular. the phenomenon needs to be understood in plural as commercializations of child and youth sports. The different territories function differently. But on the other hand, all of these territories can also be understood from the perspective of the changing ideal of parenthood that I mentioned at the outset. A parent ideal that is about maximizing their own children's opportunities. There's also such ideas about children in childhood that becomes visible on the company's websites, such as when they highlight individual training and competent trainer and such things. But I also want to problematize that it is only about a changed parenting ideal, because I want to emphasize that one must also take into account the structural differences that exist between families and when they encounter websites and the commercial alternatives. I want to highlight how the services are filled with social and cultural values, establish boundaries in terms of who can feel addressed to and who is not addressed in a company's communication. The boundaries established in the study becomes primarily visible through the company's pricing and how the sporting child looks. In this way, desires, deterritorialization, and territorializations are also about power aspects. And I want to emphasize that. Being able to dream becomes a question of being able to afford it or being able to fit in with those who capitalize on the dreams. So to conclude, the foundation of the post-industrial labor market is to take control over social and cultural phenomena in order to sell services and products. In the case of commercializations of children's and youth sport, the challenge for non-profit children's and youth sports is to try to maintain the idea of a sport for all and to materialize feelings and ideas about why it is needed and why it needs to be done in a non-profit setting. The challenge is therefore to produce ideas about non-profit sports that can materialize other fantasies, feelings, and tastes than a commercial sport. And perhaps one way to do this is possibly to emphasize the collective and democratic character that sport clubs are based on, and to show that there is a difference between commercial sports and non-profit sports. Thank you for listening.
Okay, questions, reflections? Sina?
Highly interesting, Jesper.
No, thank you.
Really, really a crucial part of what's happening to youth sport. How do you define commercial? I mean, there's a sector growing as well, which is the NGO sector trying to receive private funding.
Yeah, okay. As a non-profit sector trying to get private funding, I would call that a commercialization, but a different kind of commercialization process that I have studied, but something that is worth studying, I think. My point is that commercialization is hard to define, but rather this is one way of doing it, looking at companies that start to sell these services. But I think there is a commercialization process within the sports clubs as well that is needed to be looked at. And what happens to voluntary sports when commercial IDs are established.
But so your definition was actually companies.
Companies, yeah.
And that's also, I know, why you studied websites, because that's where they are. You don't find them anywhere, so to speak.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was very interesting, and I've read one of the articles now. I'll read the others. But, I just wonder if you could clarify a little further. I don't understand when you talk about fusion.
Okay. No,
is that because they're like from the old and the new, or?
No, I think the fusion, I mean, is a fusion between the sport development processes and the physical activity processes. So it's some kind of fusion between sports development, but also just the joy of being physically active that these companies are trying to sell. Like gathering, some companies gather like football, ice hockey, many sports during one summer week, and they do not only have sports activities, so it's a fusion between sports and
Okay, thank you.
everything.
Yeah, so in some ways, these companies do what many sport clubs have tried to do, or there's at least been a talk about doing it, namely providing, different sports for the same children.
Yeah.
And looking at this, Sina.
I just think it's so interesting. Did any of them touch on rights-related issues, or if you were to say the topics or problems or phenomenon they dealt with, was that mainly sport for development or
The companies,
health promotion or
I would say that
inclusion?
they differ in what they have for kind of main idea about their services. So some of them are very critical about sports club because they are not so inclusive or do not provide this kind of good, healthy sports for children. They think they are too specialized at an early point and not educated coaches, so they cannot take care of the children, while others then have the exactly opposite position, where they say it's too much care and it's not too specialized, it needs to be more. So they, in a way, they polarize sports for children and youth.
Yes, and I know that when you were analyzing the youngest, the ones between 3 and 7, there was also a statement that you could be from 8 months.
I think it was a company that stated they had service for 3 months even.
It said...
and they said that no earlier experience is needed.
Which made us
So
good
it's
laugh.
really inclusive.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Last question.
Thank you so much. I would like to follow up on what you said about sport clubs and NGOs and commercialization, because I work a lot with the NGOs, sport NGOs, and they have a need to attract funds and fundraise a lot because they wish to accommodate these young people's needs that change at a faster pace than all the other members maybe in the club. They need skills in order to accommodate their needs. They need they need materials and so on. You see it as a commercialization, I understand. Why is that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I see. I wouldn't say that is the commercialization. That is what they do to commercialize. So I would say there is a difference that educated coaches are commercialization per se. I rather would say that they use it to commercialize. That they imbue some kind of need. They do this immaterial labor that this is important. But then again, why is it important? Well, and that's the big question. Is it to attract money? Is it for the good of the children? Or so I think communication and what we say about child and youth sport and why we say it is a big part of how we attract funds and what we think about children and youth sport as well. Do we need the funds to provide a good children and youth sport? Who knows?
Okay. Well, thank you again, Jesper. And
Thank you.